And I am going to actually ask one question that there are actually a couple of forms of this question in the chat. So I'm going to ask this question, which was submitted anonymously, because you do have that option to submit anonymously or submit under your name. So the question says, some students have talked to me about feeling that they are targeted in class if they have a Christian belief system. As has been expressed to me, they feel that others, such as Muslims, Hindus, or even Wiccans, can express their beliefs openly through their speech and dress. But these students, I've had several, feel that if they express their Christian beliefs, that they are made to feel like they are the source of everyone's problems. How do we address their concerns? Now, before someone addresses this, I also want to say the other version of it kind of alluded to minoritized students attacking other folks who do not share their minoritized label in the classroom, and then those folks feeling unable to share if they are identified as the conservative or whatever other binary title that they're holding at that moment. So I'll shoot this to someone who would like to address it. Please raise your hands if you would like. Don't all raise your hands at once. Raise your hand if you would like to take this question on. Okay, so while somebody starts to think about it, because one of y'all is going to answer this question, I don't want to have to pick on you directly. But one of the things that I will say is that development of one's identity is not fully realized by the time they're in our classrooms. Okay, so as students are entering our spaces in undergraduate, even graduate coursework, right? We have folks who truly have no fully formed identity, that they know the construction of their identity. They have been people for decades and don't necessarily know why they are those people. So when you put them in spaces where they're asked to interrogate their own identity formation, the natural response is resistance, to say, this is uncomfortable. Therefore, instead of doing my internal work, it's easy for me to feel put upon by other folks. And I'm not saying that's all students, but I'm saying that that is a reaction that I have seen and have even experienced myself, being that, we are non-monolithic, and across our identities, across that whole wheel of identities, we will experience oppression and privilege differently. So remember that even with intersectionality, there is privilege among your different identity bands. So though I am a Black woman born and raised in Mississippi, there are other areas of privilege that I have and use freely, right? So I have lived in spaces where my cis-normative, heteronormative life provides me certain privileges that my trans and queer siblings do not receive. I have lived in religiously dominant spaces where being a Christian afforded me opportunities, and I can attend schooling and other governmental agencies that align with my holiday system for my holidays. So as a college student, when I was put into positions to be walking among people who had different identities, my natural response was to say, oh, well, that's just not right. Because if you weren't raised the way I was raised, something has to be wrong with you, right? And in the classroom, had I not had a professor who challenged me by asking me where I formed my own identity, I don't know that I would be brought to the position where I can actually go into a space and hear and receive knowledge fully. So my answer to that question would be, for those students on all sides, those who are minoritized and those who have experienced majority privilege, to ask them where they learned themselves, where they learned they first were whatever identity they're holding on to at that point. And again, thank you, Taisha, for bringing up my TED Talk. My TED Talk actually is about my identity development. It's about when I realized that I was both Black and a woman, and how that identity formed being in an environment that was strongly dominated by religion and white supremacy and patriarchy. So that would be my entry into that question. Does any of our panelists have anything to add?
Monica, that was great. I was actually, as I was thinking of it, that would be my initial reaction as well, is challenging the student, just one, like you said, asking them, where did you learn this identity? How did you grasp this form of thinking? Why is this your perception? And because I think that the classroom specifically is fertile ground for an exchange of ideas cross culturally, right? And so I think that you can be a positive facilitator of what initially looks like a negative situation. So I think you answered it great.
So there's, I believe the original responder put another question in the chat, which is, respectfully, Ms. Johnson, are you saying that a Muslim student does not know their identity, a Hindu student does not know their identity? I'm not sure I understand your point. Are you saying that Christians are the only ones who have to discover their identity? So a Christian student, in your opinion, has a majority identity. I would definitely say a Christian student within a country that openly has aligned itself, maybe not formally at this point, but openly has aligned itself strongly with Christianity, has been able to receive specific majority privileges within this country. And when we think about, though we have been asked within higher education not to call things Christmas holiday or Easter holiday, when we look at the alignment of higher education breaks pre-corona, I know we've gotten rid of fall breaks, and I know that we're not traditionally having a spring break. But up until my master's program, and even in my master's program at a private Baptist aligned university, had breaks, traditional breaks for Easter, had traditional breaks for Christmas holidays, had even a traditional break for the beginning of Lent and Fat Tuesday. If you think about when spring break falls in many Southern situations, specifically those close to Louisiana and New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama, which is supposedly the origins of Mardi Gras, you have breaks for in those spaces to celebrate those religious holidays. So I would say in this sense, in this country, having a Christian identity would be a point of privilege. Whereas in other countries that would be Muslim-dominated countries or Hindu-dominated countries, you will see those privileges aligned with those religions and those governmental organizations. So in my statement, and I know that was a clarification, but in my statement, I also said that you should ask all folks in your classes to go back to their original identity formation. As someone who was raised Christian, I was raised to say that there is no other way forward toward a path of eternal life but then through Christianity. And then to be placed in classrooms where I have classmates who are Buddhist, I have classmates who are coming from other Abrahamic faiths, whether that is Muslim or Jewish classmates, and classmates who are agnostic or atheist, all of us had to go to a point where we decided to interrogate where we come from and who raised us and who transmitted knowledge to us. And that doesn't mean that each of our identities didn't have value. It just meant that we, as learners, took it upon ourselves to fully interrogate who we were, or to interrogate who we were and what we believed. So I hope that provides some clarification.
And Monica, can I jump in there also just quickly? Because that did trigger something also. Thinking about the quote, and we don't really know the source, but it's been said many ways. When you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. That's the first thing that came to my mind with this. And by all means, what you said, I went my whole K to 12 undergraduate years in a system where, like you said, our calendar year and our holidays are based around Christian holidays, Christian ideals, and what have you. It wasn't until I got to grad school in New Orleans at Tulane, I had Yom Kippur off. And so, because we had a very sizable Jewish student population there, okay. And again, I'm not diminishing the holiday, but when you think of students, they're like, oh, we got another day off, for those who don't practice the faith. But then looking at the eyes from the students, so to the person who asked that question, I want you to unpack with the students who may feel like, so what's the issue actually here? As someone else who identifies as Christian, I had to advise the Pagan Student Association when I was down in Appalachian, when I worked in North Carolina. I learned a lot about Wiccans and stuff like that. That didn't change anything about my ideas, I believe, but I knew as an assistant director in Office Multicultural Affairs, I had to advocate for all students, and I love all my students. And so I think the thing of is not looking at this as, well, I'm being oppressed. I think Beverly Tatum in her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in Cafeteria, does a very great job in explaining dominant and subordinate groups. And if you can just have that conversation with your students in context, is the fact that you can have these holidays off because in this country, we are the dominant group as it pertains to this particular identity. Okay. And then what does that mean for our students who are Muslim and have to celebrate Ramadan? Another experience I'm thankful for is the Muslim Student Association asked, people to take a day in the life with the Muslim students during Ramadan to see what fasting looked like and what that and breaking bread at sundown. And so I think one of those things where immersion in these experiences showed us what it looked like from a non-dominant group to experience these things. And so I just think interrogating identity and actually pushing back on students who may say that and actually asking them, well, what exactly is bothering you about this, celebrating other folks? Because I don't see a problem in celebrating other people.
I can add one other brief thing, which is that, this is something that I come across a lot in teaching African history, is that, it's important to acknowledge, again, the sort of central role that Christianity has played in creating oppressive systems. And we can talk about that in any number of ways. That can be, the Christian evangelization in 19th century and 20th century Africa, in which, untold violence occurred in various registers. We can talk about boarding schools, indigenous boarding schools. There are many, many ways that we can talk to our Christian students about the ways that Christianity has been implicated in some of the worst aspects of human history. That doesn't make them bad people. It doesn't mean their religion is not worthy of belief. But we have to be honest that Christianity has been responsible for some pretty terrible things. And that's the position that I would take in sort of trying to get students to think differently about who they are in the classroom. I think we all have to be able to separate the sort of personal from the structural. And to me, that's an obvious way to kind of approach that question of who's being oppressed and in what space and in what time.